Exactly. Yeah. Great, amazing. Thank you so much, Sohail Sultan, for taking the time and sitting down with us today. So before we kickstart the interview, can you please share a bit about yourself as well as your role at iibGroup Holdings?
So my background is as a banker. I started my banking career with Citibank in the early 90s, and Citibank in those days was very much like those US Army recruitment posters of the 60s, join the army and see the world. And that was very much my my career and my time with Citibank. So on joining Citibank, I was promptly packed off to the Far East, and I spent time in Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and traveling and covering the rest of the Far East. And then after that, time in Europe and South America and North America with the bank. It was a fascinating time. And then about a year after the merger with Travelers, myself and my colleagues effectively moved the business or part of the business to a British bank called Barclays Capital, where we built effectively a structured finance business and a North American financial institutions business. And we did that until about 2008. Thereafter, I basically stepped down from Barclays Capital, and I started focusing on private equity and financial institutions opportunities in the Middle East and South Asia. Then around 2011, we led a management buy-in of a bank in Bahrain. Unfortunately, timing coincided with the Arab Spring. So our efforts to turn the bank around and resuscitate, I think, proved somewhat fruitless. There was also a divergence in terms of shareholders who I think took the view that their quickest route for them to realize value was through a liquidation rather than a turnaround. But we had so much fun, I think, in terms of managing a troubled institution that myself and my colleagues as part of the management team thought, well, why don't we try and do this ourselves? So in that respect, we stayed on in Bahrain, and we set up a investment holding company in 2016, where we tried to focus and concentrate our efforts around effectively building a banking group through the investment company. Our first acquisition was in 2017, and it was a small bank in Djibouti. And our second acquisition was the West African banking assets of a Portuguese bank, which had gone bankrupt, which was centered out of Cape Verde. So that started, I think, helping us formulate a strategy, and the strategy was really twofold. It was a geographic focus, and it was also a product focus. On the geographic side, our focus became effectively East Africa, and for us, East Africa was the Djibouti-Ethiopia trade corridor. On the West African side, it was very much the Portuguese African-speaking countries. We then continued to build the group, and we set up an operation in the Bahamas, which initially acted as a centralized treasury, but increasingly also is focusing on private banking and digital banking and digital assets. And our focus continued to expand to cover effectively the GCC and also a South Asian customer base. On the product side, our product focus was very much driven, I think, in part of our observations post the global financial crisis, where we observed effectively multinational banks, large international banks, largely withdrawing from the emerging market banking space based upon more a perception of risk rather than the actuality of risk. So we perceived there to be an opportunity. And so our product focus has really been driven by that. It's effectively banking a emerging market footprint on the commercial banking side, on the transactional banking side. So focusing on payments, transfers, cash management, treasury services and trade finance, and also on the offshore banking side in terms of providing private banking client services to clients in the emerging market footprint that we cover. So that's who we are, and that's what we've done. In terms of where we've grown from, so we started with a zero asset base, and as of today, we're around $700 million of gross assets. We're still, by any measure, a small institution, but we continue to remain ambitious to grow, both with regard to organic expansion by growing the markets and segments that we're focused in, but also in terms of inorganic expansion through judicious acquisitions. both in the developed markets that we interact with, but also in terms of expanding our emerging market footprint.
Amazing. Seems like IIB has a lot of geographic footprints among Caribbean, West Africa, Europe, East Africa, and Middle East as well. So in this interview today, we want to focus specifically on the Bahamas region. So as the chairman of iibGroup, you have an unrivaled insight into the financial health of the Bahamas consumers. So what are the people and business doing with money right now in Bahamas?
So I think when we think about Bahamas and talk about the Bahamas, we have to differentiate between the domestic banking market and the international banking market. So I think when you look at the Bahamian economy, the two principal drivers behind the strength and the foundations and the economic success of the country over the last 50 odd years has been founded on developing it as a tourist center, but also as an offshore financial center. And in recent years, unfortunately, the term offshore has had some negative connotations, but I think that would be misapplied in the context of Bahamas. Bahamas is a very well regulated, very well structured banking market, which facilitates effectively an international customer base and international flows through their offshore bank licensing regime. So when we came to the Bahamas, it was very much with that in mind. So we have a full banking license as an offshore bank to operate out of the Bahamas. Initially, the focus had been to enhance our treasury capability for the group and for our customer base through the Bahamas. But increasingly, over the years that we've been in the Bahamas, which is now coming up to 5 years, the focus has changed slightly. So increasingly, we're doing two things. One is consistent with what historically Bahamas has done, and the second, I think, is very much still in the growth and is in alignment with where Bahamas wants to be. So we're focused on the private banking side, so offering offshore banking services to our growing private banking customer base, both in the Middle East and Africa and South Asia, to be banked out of Bahamas, and also equally thinking about aligning ourselves by increasingly servicing and facilitating a client base within the digital asset world. And that is, I think, consistent with the strategy which I think Bahamas has been pursuing in recent years.
I see. So given the current geopolitical backdrops, do you think that kind of affects the banking sector? Given the increasing uncertainty among consumers themselves. So in response, how does IIB banks are approaching this problem and addressing these issues?
So banking is, as I'm sure you know, a very, very complicated operating environment. It's become even more complicated, I think, post 9/11 and post the global financial crisis. So 9/11 and the global financial crisis were seminal moments within the financial industry and specifically banking. 9/11, I think, made the world have to sit up, and especially the banking industry, and think about the way money was being transmitted, how flows were being managed, how transactional services were increasingly being facilitated, and ensuring that we were compliant with national and international law and standards. So the regulatory burden and compliance burden on banks has increased significantly. And given that we ourselves as an emerging market institution operate in that space, the level of scrutiny and the standard to which we are held is significantly higher than potentially banks who are operating in the developed market space, not least in Western Europe or North America or parts of the Far East. The second thing clearly is post the global financial crisis, the level of regulatory scrutiny to ensure that banks are properly managed and properly manage risk and solvency and liquidity has increased dramatically. And that's understandable because at the end of the day, banks are custodians of public funds. So it's important to ensure that we are properly managed and well managed, and we remain compliant with the necessary risk frameworks which we are now required to operate within. So those have been the two real challenges. As we go forward, clearly, as we move away from potentially a globalized world to a more multipolar world, there will be increased challenges to ensure that we continue to remain compliant and that we abide by the level of regulation which all international institutions are now being subject to. The additional challenges are clearly in the space and area of technology, and the pace and rate of innovation over the last 10, 15 years within the technology space, and how that has effectively intermediated in functions which banks have traditionally and historically undertaken. The simplest being simply payments or processing of transactional flows. Alternative forms of payments, alternative forms of transactional processing have created challenges for banks, and we are no exception to that. In addition to that, the digitization of our economies, and not least the financial sector, remains a challenge. And within that, a subset is clearly the advent and development of digital assets and digital payment systems. So these are the challenges which we face, and these are the opportunities equally which are available. And as an institution, small institution, as we continue to look to grow, we look to pivot to address those challenges and to embrace them as opportunities.
I see. Yeah, so you mentioned about the challenges that embedded in the regulatory frameworks, as well as technology adoptions and the levels of digital readiness for the emerging markets. So as a bank, how do you contribute to economic development and growth of the Bahamas region?
So once again, I mean, in terms of banking within Bahamas, it splits quite clearly between a domestic banking sector and an offshore banking sector, and to a degree they overlap. Clearly, as a offshore licensed bank, we are limited in our dealings with Bahamians directly, or in terms of the direct economy. But that being said, as part of the ecosystem of offshore banking, we hope that we make a significant and positive contribution, not least in terms of continue to position Bahamas as a location, a well-regulated location to intermediate a lot of regional and international flows, either on the trade side or the transactional side. And as a consequence, we make a contribution to the Bahamian economy, not least through direct and indirect employment, but also in terms of continued development on the technological front, and the contribution in terms of ideas which we can equally apply domestically within the Bahamas.
Understand. So in terms of the differentiations, apart from other banks in the region, so can you please outline some of the competitive advantage that iibGroup has compared to other banks in the same region?
So I think iibGroup, as it currently stands, is somewhat unique insofar as our client base and our geographic focus is probably somewhat contrarian to the majority of offshore banks operating out of the Bahamas. Our customer base is effectively East and West Africa. Our customer base is the GCC. Our customer base is South Asia, and it's effectively banking those private clients through the Bahamas. And as a customer subset, that's a relatively unique customer subset relative to the traditional institutions which have operated out of the Bahamas, which have historically had either a North American or a Western European focus. So our hope is, given our experience over time in operating in these highly complex markets, we can effectively bank those clients effectively through our offshore banking operations in the Bahamas.
I see. So in terms of the, let's switch our focus a bit to understand more about the leadership styles as well as the workplace environment. So we noticed that iibGroup have consistently ranked as the best workplaces. So what are some secret sauces behind that? What have you done to ensure like a transparent and inclusive workplace for all employees?
So I guess there's no simple answer to that, but it stems from a number of things. I think firstly and foremostly, the institution is entirely owned by its employees, by senior management. So there is an alignment of interests within the institution. Shareholder interests are aligned with management interests, which are aligned with hopefully customer interests and employee interests. So stakeholders have an alignment across the board. Secondly, we try to operate as a partnership. So it's not that one particular view will prevail, but we do manage to a large degree through consensus. And as a consequence, we are sometimes slower or more risk adverse insofar as we don't have consensus amongst the partners and senior management. But at the same time, we at least have some level of stability, consistency, and consensus in terms of what we do. And thirdly, there is we hope, a culture of openness and transparency, where effectively people understand what they're doing, what they're supposed to be doing, that there is an alignment of interest so that they will be rewarded in terms of the results which are produced, and those results are shared across the institution. So I think those are at least aspects of hopefully why this has been voted a great place to work and will continue to be highly rated as a place to work.
I see. Yep. So in terms of the sustainable development goals, iibGroup is also very committed to this social governance. Can you please share a couple of examples or initiatives that you've done that kind of outline or emphasize on the initiatives that the banks have for the society?
Well, clearly, ESG is very important, increasingly so. A lot of institutions simply pay lip service to it, but I think we've made strident efforts to actually implement it on a practical basis. I think the starting point is that the markets which we operate in are developing markets, so the environmental, social, and governance issues are all the more important on the governance side to ensure that we are maintaining standards which are consistent with the highest international regulatory standards. On the social side, clearly we are driven by a desire to do good and to contribute meaningfully to the markets and the societies which we operate within. And on the environmental side, to ensure that there is consideration for the impact of what we do in our activities. So I think the easiest examples to give in a practical sense is that we have done, for example, a blue bond, which is specifically being used to support marine projects, marine developments of a environmentally positive nature. We've done a green bond with similar consistencies, which was listed by our West African bank on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange November last year. We've also issued a social development bond where effectively investors have been happier to take a lower yield, and the differential is effectively being used to support socially important projects, be it education or health in the markets in which we operate. The second thing is that we do, as an institution, feel the need to make a direct contribution back into the societies and the communities in which we operate in and look to serve. And we have an ongoing charitable program whereby we look to support education and health above all else. So, for example, last year we effectively extended 8 bursaries and 4 scholarships to international universities for people for younger people in the markets in which we operate. And then finally, we work very closely with a lot of the developmental financial institutions out of Europe and North America, where clearly they have a priority to ensure that their lending or their developmental support is consistent with the ESG goals. So in that respect, we maintain close relationships with these institutions, and we effectively work with them on financing arrangements whereby the proceeds of those financing arrangements are specifically directed to projects which have a meaningful social impact. So, for example, we will work with a development financial institution to put in place a term loan financing facility for one of our other of our banks, and the proceeds of that will in turn then be dispersed to support small and medium enterprise lending in the local markets, with an emphasis on female empowerment, for example.
Amazing. Yeah, it's very amazing to listen to all the initiatives that our banks have been doing to promote the social goods. So just one last question on the prediction of the future of offshore banking. So with your current insights and also experience in the space, so what are some predictions for the future of offshore banking in the Bahamas region, and what role do you see iibbanks playing in this future?
Well, I think Bahamas continues and will continue to be critical for us as a group as we look to grow. On the offshore banking side, we continue to look to see a development of our private banking, wealth management product offering, client offering, servicing the client base in the emerging market space. We're seeing a withdrawal of a number of traditional players with perhaps a focus on servicing a European client base. And I think that's been a function of the regulatory challenges they've been facing in their home market regulatory environments more than anything else. Bahamas is a great location, stable democratic government, hard pegged to a hard currency, consistent economic growth, a well-educated workforce, a sound financial regulator, a progressive regulatory framework which continues to develop and evolve. So these are all positive contributors, creating a framework to, I think, support and encourage the continued growth in offshore banking out of the Bahamas as an offshore banking center. So we remain positive on that. I think the other critical thing goes back to the point we discussed with regard to technology and its rapid pace of development. Bahamas, I think, clearly has been the forefront of digital assets and has created a very progressive framework for the regulation of that. Now, as the digital asset environment has continued to grow and evolve, there has been an absence in most markets with a sound regulatory framework. Bahamas has clearly been ahead of the game in that regard. So it has provided, I think, a framework and an environment to allow for the development, the ever development of that business, both on the digital asset side as well as on the financial technology payment side. And as we grow, we look to pivot and we look to try and embrace those opportunities as an institution.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So yeah, I think that already wraps up the question for our interview today. If there's anything else that you'd like to share with our readers about the Bahamas financial sectors or iib banks, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I think this interview today is super comprehensive. Thank you so much for your valuable responses. Our team will definitely try to reach back to the PIC, in this case, Farah, for any further feedbacks or if we need any comments from you. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Than. It was a pleasure to have met you, and I hope to meet you again soon.
Hopefully, yes. Enjoy the rest of the day. Yeah. Thank you.
And you
Okay,
too.
thank you both.
Take
Okay,
care.
bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.